Welcome to Nexus Medical Media. In this video, we are going to talk about, we first introduce the nervous system, and then we focus on the brain. And in the upcoming video, we'll be covering different parts of the brain, right? So, functions of the nervous system. The nervous system is like a sensory input. It gathers the information, and what does it do with this information, right? It monitors the changes occurring inside and outside the body, right? And those changes are called the stimuli, and they are registered through receptors. The second function is integration. This is a processing and interpreting the sensory input and deciding if the action is needed. If the action is needed, then we'll introduce the third function, the motor output. This is a response to integrated stimuli, and the response activates the muscles or glands, right? So the nervous system, basically, it connects the living organism with the outside environment, right? So you can see in this diagram, this is an eye, right? It's an organ of vision. So it get the sensitivity and goes with it to the brain, and there is integration in the output. Let's just say you see a lion, and then you register it in the brain, and then it will activate your motor muscles, and then you run for your life, right? So the nervous system is divided into two, the central and peripheral. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is basically like those 31 pairs of spinal nerves and the 10 pairs of cranial nerves. Not 10 really, because as we dive deep, you'll see that the optic nerve is like an extension of the brain. Yeah, we'll talk about that later in cranial nerves, right? But for now, I just wanted you to get the classification: the central nervous system and peripheral. Here we are focused on the central, the brain and the spinal cord, right? The brain first, right? Okay, so this is what I just said, right? The classification: human nervous system, central, peripheral. In central, you find the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral, you find the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Easy, right? Okay, so let's just go back and look at the development of the brain, right? So the brain, firstly, it forms right. So firstly, the brain starts as vesicles. They are called primary vesicles, and there are three. There is forebrain called prosencephalon. There is midbrain called the mesencephalon, and the hindbrain called the rhombencephalon, right? So prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon. Yeah, but English is fine. Forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. And in green here, you can see the spinal cord, but we are not focusing on it, not yet. And then later, these primary vesicles will be converted or be specialized into secondary vesicles. And the secondary vesicles, here is the thing, right? So the forebrain or the prosencephalon will split into two, and the rhombencephalon will split into two, right? And the midbrain will remain like that. So here on the secondary vesicles, you find the telencephalon and the diencephalon. They come from the presencephalon. The mesencephalon will remain the same. Oh my God, forgive my tongue. Mesencephalon remain the same. And then the rhombencephalon will form the metencephalon and myelencephalon. Right, so this is from 25 to 50 days. This is a fully formed brain. It consists of the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. The brainstem is mainly the midbrain, the pons variouli, the medulla oblongata, right? So you are scientists, guys. You are going to become maybe doctors one day, or just anyone who is interested in science. Please stop telling people to use their medulla oblongata, because you can't voluntarily use your medulla oblongata. No, you can't control that. Okay, you are going to understand it later. Right? But for now, let's focus on the cerebrum, the first part. So the cerebrum has two hemispheres called the cerebral hemispheres, left and right. Right, I will show you on a different view, right? But I just want you to appreciate the presence of these ridges, right? So the ridges are called the gyrus, and there are depressions here called the sulcus, sulci in plural, right? Gyrus and sulci, right? So if you take one cerebral hemisphere and have a lateral view, you see different lobes, right? From this one is the anterior side, and this is the posterior. Of course, that's why there is a nose here, right? So you can see the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital, the temporal lobe. These are the main important lobe. Deep inside, there are some structures which we'll talk about later, but for now, let's just focus on these four: the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. Okay, this one is the medial view, like through a sagittal section, right? So you can see the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and here is the temporal lobe, right? Again, here you can see these structures that I mentioned. This one is the cingulate gyrus. This one is corpus callosum, right? So that's how the hemispheres are attached. They are attached through this corpus callosum, this one, right? And if you follow where it ends here, there is the anterior commissure, right? There's a commissural fibers for communication between these two hemispheres, right? So this one is the anterior commissure, and on the back you find the posterior commissure here. And if you go a little deep, you find the hypothalamus, you find the optic chiasm. Here is the pituitary gland. Here is a mammillary body. Okay, let's go to the back, and you see that there is epithalamus. Epithalamus consists of the pineal gland here, called the third eye by some authors, and the habenula. Right, so here is the cerebellum. Here it's like a tree, right? Like pine leaves, right? And this is the brain stem. The brain stem has the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. Behind it, you find the fourth ventricle, right? And the fourth ventricle, the floor of the fourth ventricle is called the rhomboid fossa. We have a separate video on the rhomboid fossa, but this is the fourth ventricle. So the third ventricle, you find it somewhere around here, and the lateral ventricles on the left and the right side, right? Okay, this one is the cerebral aqueduct connecting the connecting the fourth ventricle and the third ventricle. So the first and second are the lateral ones, right and left lateral ventricles, right? So we will talk more about these structures, don't worry. But for now, you can appreciate the central sulcus is very important here, and the parieto occipital sulcus here. Okay, let's go ahead. This is the inferior view of the brain. You can see the temporal lobes, right here and here. That's the temporal lobes. The frontal lobes here and here, and this one is not actually the occipital, but it's the cerebellum. The occipital, you can, if you can see this maroonish color, yeah, that's the occipital lobe, but you can't see it properly here. Here you see the cerebellum. This is the brain stem, where you find the medulla oblongata. This one is the pons, right? Okay, right, so you can see the pituitary gland, the optic chiasm, right? One thing I wanted to say is about the the last part, I mean, you know, during development, there was a rhombencephalon, right? So I said rhombencephalon will give you the pons varoli, the medulla oblongata, and the cerebellum, right? So they develop from the rhombencephalon. Mesencephalon is just midbrain all alone, and then the prosencephalon, that's where you find the diencephalon, mainly the thalamus, which I never mentioned in this video. Yeah, it's a very important structure, and the cerebrum, right? What we're talking about, these important these two hemispheres with frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital, and the temporal lobe, right? This is right, this is the superior view. I wanted to show you these, right? This is the right cerebral hemisphere. This one is the left cerebral hemisphere. In between, you can see they are separated by a fissure. It's called a longitudinal fissure here. Okay, so you can see the lobes, the frontal lobe, right? The frontal lobe is separated from the parietal lobe by the central sulcus. And here on the back, you can see the occipital lobe, and is separated from the parietal lobe by the parieto-occipital sulcus, right? Here is the lateral view. You know this already, the spinal cord, the brain stem, the cerebellum, the cerebrum. Okay, you can see the central sulcus here, the gyrus, and the lateral sulcus. This is another sulcus which is very important. That it laterally it separates the what, this one is the parietal lobe, and here there is a continuous. This one is the frontal lobe. It's separating these from the temporal lobe. Okay. Thank you so much for now. This is going to be a long journey, so stay tuned for the upcoming videos. Until next time.